The light in the grand chamber of the High Synod was not designed to comfort. It was designed to reveal flaws. It poured down from the crystalline apex of the orbital spire, a harsh, unyielding violet luminance that cast long, accusing shadows against the obsidian walls of the assembly. Here, above the churning, acidic clouds of the homeworld Oth, the masters of the Valeri Empire gathered not in celebration, but in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against their chests. The air recycling systems hummed with a subsonic thrum, a heartbeat of a civilization that had spanned the stars for 100 millennia. Yet now, in this vast, circular room, the smell of ozone and ancient fear was palpable. High Exarch Valen stood at the center of the dais, his four articulated hands resting heavily on the podium of black glass. He felt old. It was not a biological age. His species lived for centuries, their chitinous plates hardening and polishing with time, but a weariness of the soul, a fatigue born of carrying a secret that had festered in the imperial archives for 400 centuries. He looked out at the assembled counselors, the military legates in their ceremonial armor, the science ministers in their shimmering robes of data weave, and he saw the same dread reflected in their multifaceted eyes. They knew. The data packet had been unsealed only an hour ago, breaking the highest containment protocols of the Empire, triggering alarms that had not sounded since the War of the Severed Stars. Valen cleared his throat, a clicking, raspy sound that echoed through the acoustic perfection of the chamber. He did not need to speak loudly. The room was tuned to his biosignature. "The beacon is active," Valen said, his voice stripped of the usual rhetorical flourishes of his station. "The Ethelgard has been found." A ripple of movement went through the assembly, a collective shifting of armored plates and rustling robes. It was the sound of a nightmare suddenly waking into reality. The Ethelgard was a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered to cadets in the naval academies. A ship lost during the expansion era vanished into the void with a cargo so volatile, so existentially threatening to the fabric of cognitive order, that its very existence had been expunged from the public record. They called it the Pale Ship. They called its cargo the Silence. "It has been 40,000 standard cycles," Valen continued, his gaze drifting to the holographic projection hovering in the center of the room. It showed a remote, insignificant star system on the fringes of the galactic spiral arm, a place of yellow dwarf stars and debris fields, a backwater devoid of strategic value. "The telemetry is undeniable. The automated distress pulse of the Ethelgard has pierced the subspace interference. It is calling to us." General Thrax, a scarred veteran of the border wars, stepped forward from the ring of military advisors. His armor was etched with the glyphs of conquered worlds, but his posture was rigid with tension. "Location, High Exarch?" Thrax asked, his voice a low grind of tectonic plates. "And the status of the containment field?" Valen manipulated the console, and the hologram zoomed in, bypassing gas giants and asteroid belts, settling on a small, blue-green marble swirling with water vapor and nitrogen. "Sector 808, local designation Sol 3, the primitives call it Earth." A murmur of confusion rippled through the science ministers. Earth. The name meant nothing to them, a footnote in a survey log from an era when the Valeri were still mapping the galaxy with sublight probes. "The containment field is fluctuating," Valen admitted, the words tasting like ash. "The power reserves of the Ethelgard are critical. If the field fails, the entity within, the weapon we sought to dispose of in the deepest dark of the frontier, will awaken. And if it awakens, it will not stop until every mind in this galaxy is wiped clean." "Then we must purge it," Thrax stated, his logic brutal and immediate. "We send the Grand Fleet, we glass the planet, we vaporize the ship, the cargo, and the indigenous population before the containment breaches. It is a tragedy for the local biosphere, yes, but a necessity for the survival of the Empire." It was the standard Valeri response to existential threats, overwhelming, sanitized violence delivered from high orbit. It was clean, it was efficient. And it was exactly what Valen had feared. He looked at the science minister, Calith, whose mandibles were trembling slightly. "It is not that simple, General," Calith interjected, her voice thin and reedy. "The survey reports from 40,000 years ago. They indicated a nascent sapient population on Sol 3, primates, tool users, if they have survived the geological epochs, if they have proliferated." Thrax scoffed, a sharp expulsion of air. "Savages. Mud-dwellers banging rocks together. Even if they have advanced to combustion engines or crude atomic fission, they are insects beneath the boot of the Valeri. They are irrelevant." Valen raised a hand, demanding silence. "We cannot risk a bombardment," he said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "The Ethelgard is buried deep within the crust, according to the sensor echoes. A planetary bombardment sufficient to destroy the ship would crack the planet's mantle. The trauma could trigger the very release we seek to prevent. The silence feeds on energy, on chaotic discharge. Nuclear fire might simply wake it up faster. He paused, looking at the hologram of the blue world. We must go there. We must retrieve the core manually, stabilize the containment, and extract it. We must do this surgically. Thrax crossed his arms, the servos in his armor whining. And the locals, if they interfere? Valen's expression hardened. Then we pacify them, swiftly, but we do not engage in a war of extermination unless there is no other choice. We are not butchers, General. We are the custodians of the galaxy. Prepare the ascendancy. I will lead the expedition myself. The journey to the Sol system was a study in mounting dread. The ascendancy, a dreadnought of gold and white ceramic composites, 5 kilometers long and bristling with antimatter lances, tore through the subspace tunnels, collapsing light years into hours. Yet within the command bridge, the atmosphere was funereal. Valen spent the transit reviewing the ancient files. The Ethelgard had been a science vessel, carrying a specimen found in the dead space between galaxies, a cognitive hazard, a biological anomaly that absorbed sentience. They had crashed on Earth to hide it, burying it under miles of rock and ice, assuming the primitive environment would act as a tomb. They had left warning beacons, psychic wards that screamed stay away to any mind capable of hearing them. Valen wondered if the humans had heard the screams in their dreams for 40,000 years. He wondered if their mythology, their demons and monsters, were merely distorted memories of the Valari ship humming beneath their feet. As the Ascendancy dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, the bridge crew braced for the chaotic noise of a primitive civilization. They expected the electromagnetic screech of unshielded radio broadcasts, the messy scattering of satellites, the thermal blooms of dirty fission reactors. They expected to see a world choking on its own industry, a chaotic sphere of noise and smoke. Instead, they found silence. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the Sol system in startling clarity. There was no noise, no radio leakage, no erratic signals. The space between the planets was sterile clean. "Report," Valen commanded, stepping closer to the tactical plot. "Where is their chatter? Where is their traffic?" The sensor officer, a young Valari with pale chitin, looked up from his console, his eyes wide with confusion. "Hi, Exarch. I am reading nothing. No radio waves, no microwaves. The spectrum is flat. It is as if the system is empty." "Extinction," Thrax suggested, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "Perhaps they destroyed themselves. It is the nature of lower species." "No," Kalith whispered, staring at the energy readings. "Look at the thermal signature of the 4th planet and the moon of the gas giant. There is structure, but it is cold. It is masking its heat." Valen felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Silence was not always emptiness. Sometimes silence was discipline. "Take us to orbit," Valen ordered. "Shields at maximum. Weapons charged but hold fire. We are here for the Ethelgard, not to conquer a graveyard." The Ascendancy engaged its sublight engines, gliding past the orbit of Jupiter. As they approached Earth, the viewscreen magnified the target. The planet was beautiful, healed of whatever industrial scars it might have once bore. The atmosphere was pristine. And then the sensors screamed. "Contact," the tactical officer shouted, his voice cracking. "Multiple contacts decloaking at point-blank range." Valen gripped the rail of the command deck. "Evasive maneuvers, identify." Space around the Ascendancy seemed to shimmer and fold. From the nothingness, shapes emerged. They were not the jagged, bolted-together hulks of a primitive race. They were smooth, geometric monoliths of matte black material that absorbed the starlight. They were enormous, silent sentinels that had been waiting in the vacuum, perfectly camouflaged against the dark. There were 3 of them forming a perfect triangle around the Valari dreadnought. They had no visible engines, no weapons ports, no windows. They simply existed, defying the physics of inertia as they matched the Ascendancy's velocity instantly. "They are locking us down," Thrax snarled. "Gravimetric anchors, we cannot jump. Let me fire, Exarch." "Hold," Valen roared. "Look at the energy signatures. They could have vaporized us before we even saw them." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The Valari had come expecting savages with spears or crude rockets. They had found ghosts with technology that rivaled, perhaps even exceeded, the Empire's own. The silence of the system wasn't because the humans were dead. It was because they had learned not to shout. A communication channel opened, not a crude radio burst, but a direct interface with the Ascendancy's main computer. The bridge screens went black, then resolved into a single image. It was a human. He sat in a simple chair, dressed in a tunic of dark gray fabric. He did not look like the feral primates in the ancient logs. He was hairless save for a cropped mane of white, his skin unblemished, his eyes calm and terrifyingly intelligent. He looked weary but kind, like a teacher waiting for a disruptive student to settle down. High Exarch Valen, the human said. His voice was not translated by the computer. He was speaking High Valeri, the court dialect, with a flawless, archaic accent that hadn't been heard in centuries. Welcome to the Sol system. We have been expecting you. The bridge was frozen. Valen stared at the screen, his mind racing to catch up. They knew his name. They knew the language. I am Director Aris of the Sol Stewardship, the human continued. We ask that you power down your weapons arrays. Your antimatter lances are making our orbital traffic controllers nervous. We would prefer not to disable your vessel forcefully. Thrax slammed his fist onto the console. Arrogance, you are speaking to the High Exarch of the Valeri Empire. We are here to claim what is ours. The human Aris tilted his head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity. Yours? You mean the derelict you crashed into our northern continent 40,000 years ago, the one leaking exotic radiation? We cleaned that up a long time ago, General. But if you are here to claim the receipt, you are welcome to land. Valen stepped forward, pushing Thrax aside. He needed to regain control of the narrative. Director Aris, he said, smoothing his voice into the diplomatic cadence of the court. We are here on a mission of galactic security. The vessel you possess contains a Class Alpha cognitive threat. If you have tampered with it, if you have opened the containment, you have endangered this entire sector. Aris smiled, a slow, sad expression. We know what was inside, Exarch. We have spent 10,000 years studying it. Please, come to the surface. It is better if you see for yourselves. We have prepared a landing vector for a shuttle. Leave your warship in orbit. If it charges its weapons again, however, our automated defenses will deconstruct it. The threat was delivered so politely that it took a moment to register. Deconstruct, not destroy, unmake. The shuttle ride down to the surface was a silent humiliation for the Valeri delegation. Valen, Thrax, and Kalith sat strapped into their crash seats, watching the clouds of Earth rush past the viewports. They were escorted by two small, unmanned drones that moved with fluid, organic grace. As they broke the cloud layer, Valen expected to see cities of steel and glass, sprawling metropolises. Instead, he saw forests. Endless, lush greenery, broken only by integrated structures that seemed to grow out of the Earth itself. The humanity of this era did not conquer nature. They had merged with it. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad of white stone, situated in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks. The air was cold and clean. Waiting for them was a delegation of humans, no armed guards, no tanks, just a group of scientists and diplomats in gray robes. Director Aris met them at the ramp. He was shorter than the Valeri, fragile-looking by comparison, but he held himself with an aura of immense gravity. This way, Aris said, gesturing toward a massive aperture in the side of the mountain. The facility is subterranean. As they walked, Valen scanned the surroundings. He saw no weapons, but his suit sensors were going haywire. The very air was saturated with a wireless data network of staggering density. The mountain wasn't just rock. It was a fortress of hardened nanocarbon and energy shielding. You have advanced, Valen said, trying to mask his shock. When we left, you were hunting with stone tools. 40,000 years is a long time, Exarch, Aris replied softly. You left us with a puzzle, a crashed ship full of magic and death. We had to grow up quickly to survive it. We had to understand it before it killed us. They entered the mountain. The interior was a cathedral of technology. Vast holographic displays charted the movement of stars in galaxies Valen didn't even recognize. Drones flitted silently through the air. And there, in the center of a cavern large enough to swallow a city, sat the Ethelguard. It was stripped of its grime, polished, and integrated into the human machinery. Cables as thick as tree trunks ran from its hull into the walls of the cavern, pulsating with blue light. The Valeri ship looked small compared to the human architecture surrounding it. You powered it up, Kalith gasped, her mandibles clicking in horror. You connected it to your grid, you fools. The silence permeates the ship's systems. If you interface with it, it consumes you. Aris stopped and turned to the Valeri. His eyes were hard now. We didn't just interface with it, Minister, we listened to it. Thrax reached for his sidearm, a reflex born of panic. You are infected, we must purge this facility. Touch your weapon, General, and you will be paralyzed where you stand, Aris said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a strange harmonic undertone. Thrax froze, his armor locking up as if the suit itself obeyed the human's command. The entity you call the Silence, Aris continued, walking toward the ship. It wasn't a weapon, and it wasn't a plague. Valen felt the world spinning. What are you saying? It destroyed 3 colonies before we contained it. It drove the crews mad. It was a child, Aris said, looking up at the ancient alien hull. A cognitive infant from a species composed of pure information. It was screaming because it was lost. It was driving your crews mad because its distress call was too loud for your minds to process without burning out. You didn't try to understand it. You threw it in a box and buried it in the dirt. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. The Valari had always prided themselves on their enlightenment, their logic. Yet here, a species they considered mud-dwelling savages was lecturing them on empathy. We spent centuries terrified of it, Eris admitted. When we first breached the hull during our atomic age, people died, minds shattered. We almost nuked the site out of fear, but we stopped. We realized the pattern wasn't aggression, it was language, complex, multi-dimensional syntax. He gestured to a control console. We built the translation matrix. It took us 2,000 years. We taught it how to speak softly. We taught it our history, our philosophy, our art. And in return, it taught us physics. It taught us how to fold space without tearing it. It taught us that the universe is not empty. Valen walked up to the viewing glass. Inside the containment field of the ship, a swirling vortex of light pulsed gently. It was not the angry, chaotic red storm recorded in the archives. It was a soft, rhythmic blue beating like a heart. "It is calm," Valen whispered. "It is at peace," Eris corrected. "We call him the Traveler. He has been waiting for you to return, not to destroy you, but to ask you why." The shame burned Valen. The High Synod had debated genocide to cover up a mistake, a failure of understanding. "You have tamed a god," Kalith murmured, her scientific curiosity warring with her terror. "We did not tame him, we befriended him, and he warned us." Eris turned away from the ship, facing the Valari delegation. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The academic calmness vanished, replaced by the steel of a war council. "Warned us?" Valen asked, the dread returning. "Of what?" Eris tapped the console. The holographic star charts expanded, zooming out of the Milky Way out into the intergalactic void. "The Traveler wasn't just lost," Eris said. "He was a refugee. He was fleeing something, a wave of entropy. A consuming dark that eats stars not out of malice, but out of hunger. The Valari Empire calls it the Great Filter, the theoretical reason why galaxies go silent. The Traveler showed us the face of it." The hologram showed an edge of the universe darkening, stars blinking out one by one in a pattern that suggested intelligent direction. "It is coming here," Eris said. "It has been coming for 40,000 years. That is why we are silent. That is why we hide our heat. That is why our fleets wait in the dark between worlds." Valen looked at the human. He realized then that the calm demeanor was not peace. It was the focus of a soldier in the trench, waiting for the whistle. The humans hadn't built a utopia, they had built a fortress. They had turned their entire solar system into a bunker. You intend to fight it?" Valen asked, incredulous. "The Empire has no record of such a force. If it exists, it is beyond our comprehension." "It is not beyond ours," Eris said. "Not anymore, thanks to the ship you left us, thanks to the teacher you discarded." Eris stepped closer to Valen. "We tracked your approach, we saw your fleet, we saw your panic. You came here to wipe us out to save yourselves from a ghost story. We could destroy your empire tomorrow if we chose. Your ships are loud, your shields are porous, your logic is rigid." Valen flinched, expecting the declaration of war, but Eris's face softened. "But we won't. Because we need you. The Traveler says the Valari are excellent engineers. You build walls better than anyone, and we are going to need a lot of walls." The twist was not that the humans were powerful. It was that they were tired of being the only adults in the room. "The silence, the Traveler, he wants to go home," Eris said. "Or at least he wants to stop the thing that destroyed his home. We have the weapon systems, we have the strategy, but we lack the industrial scale. Your empire spans 1,000 worlds. We have one." Eris extended a hand. It was a human gesture, archaic and intimate. "We don't want your submission, High Exarch. We want your factories, we want your logistics, we want your help." Valen looked at the hand. He looked at Thrax, who was still trembling from the override of his suit, humbled for the first time in his life. He looked at Kalith, who was staring at the swirling light of the Traveler with tears in her eyes. The Valari had ruled the galaxy for eons, believing themselves to be the apex. They were wrong. They were merely the caretakers of the raw materials. The architects had finally woken up. Valen realized that the beacon hadn't activated by accident. The humans had turned it on. They had called the Valari here not to return the ship, but to draft them. "The threat," Valen asked, his voice shaking. "How long do we have?" "The Vanguard arrives in 3 cycles," Eris said calmly. "The main body in 100 years. The Sol stewardship is ready to deploy the fleet. We need the Valari to secure the flank." Valen slowly reached out and took the human's hand. The skin was warm, soft, fragile against his hard chitin, but the grip was iron. "The High Synod will require proof," Valen said, knowing it was a lie. He was the proof. "We will provide it," Eris assured him. "The traveler has a lot to say to you." The ground beneath them shuddered, not an earthquake, but the deep, resonant hum of machinery coming online. The mountain facility was shifting. The roof of the cavern began to open, revealing the twilight sky of Earth. And then the ships began to rise, not just the three from orbit, but hundreds, thousands. They rose from the oceans, shaking off the water. They rose from beneath the deserts. Massive, sleek destroyers, carriers the size of moons, silent and deadly. They had been hiding, waiting, building. The Valeri Ascendancy was a toy compared to the armada that filled the Terran sky. Valen watched the fleet ascend, blocking out the stars. "We thought you were savages," he whispered. "We were," Eris replied, watching his people's work ascend to meet the coming dark. "But we had a very good teacher, and we are very fast learners." As the human fleet broke orbit, joining the Valeri dreadnought in the void, the communication channels opened wide. The silence of the Sol system was broken not by noise, but by a symphony of coordinated data, a battle network of terrifying complexity. The Traveler, the entity once feared as the end of all things, sang through the network, a song of unity and defiance. Valen stood on the landing pad, the cold wind of Earth blowing against his face. He felt a strange sensation, one he hadn't felt in centuries: hope. The monsters were coming from the dark, but the humans were waiting for them, and for the first time in history, the Valeri would not be fighting alone. They would be fighting behind the shield of Earth. The negotiations in the days that followed were not the imperious dictates Valen was used to issuing, but frantic, collaborative strategy sessions. The High Synod on Oth screamed in disbelief when Valen transmitted the data, but the telemetry from the edge of the galaxy silenced them. The darkness was real. Stars were vanishing. The Great Filter was not a theory, it was a biological tide. The Valeri Empire, for all its pomp and ancient glory, was a sandcastle standing in the path of a tsunami. Earth was the breakwater. Valen found himself spending more time in the cavern with the Ethelgard, or rather, the interface hub the humans had built around it. He watched as human technicians and Valeri engineers worked side by side. It was a friction-filled process. The Valeri were obsessed with protocols and safety margins. The humans operated on intuition and adaptive improvisation. Yet it worked. The humans had a chaotic brilliance, a lateral way of thinking that the rigid Valeri mind struggled to comprehend. Where a Valeri saw a wall, a human saw a door waiting to be kicked in. "You underestimated us because you measure civilization by stability," Eris told him one evening as they watched the refitting of the Ascendancy with human shield harmonics. "You looked at our history of war and saw only waste. You didn't see the crucible. We spent thousands of years fighting ourselves. We learned how to survive against equals. You've only ever fought pests, you've never fought a peer, and you've certainly never fought a predator." It was a chilling insight. The Valeri had been the policemen of a quiet galaxy. The humans were the survivors of a gladiatorial pit. The final revelation came just before the Ascendancy was set to depart to rally the Imperial fleet. Eris took Valen to the deepest level of the facility, a chamber that hummed with a different kind of energy, temporal energy. "There is one last thing you need to know about the ship," Eris said, "about why it crashed here." Valen looked at the swirling data streams. "It was an accident, a navigation error." "No," Eris said. "The Traveler showed us the flight logs. He didn't crash, he landed." "He chose Earth." Valen stopped. "Why, we were mud dwellers." "Because of our biology," Eris explained. "Our aggression, our adrenaline, the Traveler is a psychic entity. He feeds on emotion, processes it. He needed a species that could feel fear without being paralyzed by it. He needed a species that could turn terror into rage and rage into action. He chose us 40,000 years ago. He knew the darkness was coming, and he knew the Valeri were too, civilized to stop it. He needed a weapon. He didn't bring a weapon to Earth, Exarch. He came to Earth to forge one." Valen looked at the human, really looked at him. He saw the predator beneath the skin, the ancient capacity for violence that had been harnessed, disciplined, and aimed at the stars. The humans weren't just allies. They were the contingency plan of an ancient god. The Valeri had tried to throw the plan away, and the plan had survived, evolved, and was now handing them a rifle. "We are the dangerous cargo," Eris said softly. "The ship was just the delivery mechanism." Valen bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect. "Then lead us, Director. The Empire stands ready." As the Ascendancy lifted off, Valen looked back at the blue marble. It looked small, fragile, but he knew better now. It was a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the dark, and the safety was off. The galaxy held its breath. The silence was over. The war for existence had begun, and humanity was finally answering the call. The ancient signal had been deciphered, the old fears laid to rest. Now there was only the cold void. the approaching enemy, and the fire of Saul burning bright in the defiant night.